Happy Easter to all of our friends. A pleasure to have you with us, our comrades in the struggle. Okay, it's a few minutes after 6 p.m. Jerusalem, Palestine time. It's a pleasure to be with you all, friends. The friendship is always cherished here in Palestine, but especially for our friends at this difficult time of our history, at a time of genocide and continuing dispossession. We're not in the best period of our history. Maybe we can argue it's one of the worst periods of our history as Palestinians now. But we're also blessed with a wonderful generation that continues to remain steadfast and resilient and refuses to give up. And we're also blessed with many of our friends around the world. So thank you for being part of our community. Usually, if I have to summarize the Palestinian situation or the Palestinian cause or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or whatever, or our Palestinian journey, I would summarize it in 2 words: a depopulated village, Nakbe, and a refugee camp. This is our story. We continue to be depopulated, dispossessed. Our cities continue to be depopulated. Our communities are being dispossessed, and we continue to be refugees. The only difference in 1948, it was a free privilege to be a refugee. Now it's almost impossible to be a refugee for our people in Gaza. They continue to be displaced from one corner to another without any mercy from Israel or everybody who's complicit in our genocide. So Sami Shasha is an amazing advocate. He is one of the best articulate Palestinians. Sadly, it has been years or decades of conflict that has put him into training. And we're addressing a very important topic for us. I mean, as Palestinian refugees, the refugee issue, UNRWA, which has been on the news, you've been following it up, and what is expected in the coming future, and how can we be part of the liberation of the Palestinian people. So, Sami, it's a tradition at Kumi sessions is that the speakers introduce themselves, and you can jump into the topic immediately.
Thank you, Omar. مساء الخير to everybody. صباح الخير to everybody. Delighted, honored to join. This is my first foray in speaking to Al Sabil friends and advocates. My name is Sami Mshasha. I worked with UNRWA for good 32 years. Before that, I worked with Al Haq, a leading Palestinian human rights organization. I was blessed and honored to be in charge of UNRWA's Department of Communications and overseeing the public information offices for UNRWA in East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza and Syria and Lebanon and Jordan. And also was part of the core team throughout the years in dealing with emergencies creeping up, whether in Gaza or the West Bank or Jordan and Syria in particular. Currently, I've been focusing my efforts into talking more about the plight of the Palestinian refugees today, what awaits them tomorrow, and what would happen to UNRWA. I will try to steal from your time. And again, thanks for taking time off to listen to this intervention. I will try to steal a few minutes just to basically lay the foundation and the background to the topic today. Of course, I'm assuming that you are as good and as aware of the situation as I am, perhaps even more. So I will just basically try to shed some lights on certain things that is happening, perhaps between the lines and behind the news. Before I talk about the current situation of UNRWA and the Palestinian refugees, if you allow me to frame it in why today's topic about UNRWA and the Palestinian refugees is relevant to everything that is going around us. Perhaps the first point of relevance, and you've been watching and following this very intently and very closely, is the fact that we are watching live the forced, deliberate, man-made hunger and the weaponization of hunger by Netanyahu and the Israeli government, and also of several shades of the Israeli political system, even going to the center and maybe slightly to the left. They're all basically in either active or silent agreement that weaponizing hunger is a way to basically break the will of the people in Gaza. This is happening live on TV, and the crazy part about this point is that whether willingly or grudgingly, the international community not only is watching and unable to force the hand of Israel by allowing the entry of water and food to 2.5 million Gazans, but there's also some sort of not appreciation, not understanding, but grudgingly understanding sometimes the narrative and the story that Israel peddles as to why poor Israel is forcing 2.5 million children and pregnant women and elderly people to basically go through starvation. Sadly, this narrative is not only holding a grip among Western media and certain Western politicians, but also you'll find it also being echoed by some Arab leaders. The second point for me of relevance is, and that's directly related to what we're discussing today, is the fact that yesterday, as of yesterday, the International Court of Justice is listening in to interventions of 39 countries and 4 different international organizations, no less than the United Nations itself, the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic States, and the African Union. All of them are presenting interventions as we speak, yesterday, today, and until Friday. Interventions in trying to convince the International Court of Justice that the Israeli attempts to delegitimize UNRWA and to delegitimize the Palestinian refugees and to delegitimize the right of return and to declare UNRWA an agency of the United Nations created in 1950 as an agency that should not be covered under the 1946 agreement that accords international organizations privileges and immunities. An attempt by Israel to strip UNRWA of this right is being challenged now as we speak in the International Court of Justice, when in December of last year, Norway, and thanks must go to Norway, led the charge by basically demanding at the General Assembly for a vote. And 137 countries voted to trouble the issue of Israel's attempt to strip UNRWA of its privileges and immunities and its right to operate in occupied Palestine. That should be troubled to International Court of Justice. Sure enough, today, there's yesterday and today and until Friday, there will be interventions by these countries and organizations in trying to convince the 15 judges in the International Court of Justice as to why this is important, not only for the starving people in Gaza, but also for the besieged and beleaguered refugees and non-refugees in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and also that if they do not challenge the Israeli narrative backed by the Trump administration, then the issue of Palestinian refugees, not only in occupied Palestine, but in the diaspora and those people living in the region, whether it be it Lebanon or Syria or Lebanon, that their also inherent rights of return will also be challenged and taken away. My third point of relevance is that as we speak today, if anybody was doubting the Israeli political machinery and system position, I see that the volume is not strong enough. I see a comment from one colleague. Omar, is the sound level good?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it is fine from me. Please, if you're having problems, turn up the volume in your computer or your speakers.
Thank you. my third point, if anybody doubted ever what is the position of Netanyahu and the political and the spectrum of the Israeli political system, you don't have to go far and research it. Just basically look to what Netanyahu had to say yesterday, the day before yesterday. And that is the hard thing for people to swallow, is that no matter what the international community is doing, no matter what a group of nations are trying to basically appease and meet Israel halfway, their position is very clear. I mean, his position is no to no to a Palestinian state ever, no to a two-state solution ever, no to even looking at the rights of the Palestinian refugees that were kicked out from 1948 onward, and yes to a perpetual conflict with the Palestinians, with the Yemenis, with the Iranians, with the Syrians, with everybody that basically challenges the fact that they, meaning the Israelis, at least the Israeli politicians, believe that there is no place for two people to live in peace and harmony, if you like, in one place, and that this place, and even beyond the historical borders of Palestine, belongs to one group of people at the expense of the other. I mean, that basically closes the door of any compromise, on any political negotiations, on any political discussions. My last and final point of relevance to this is, as the International Court of Justice is sitting today listening to the interventions of 39 countries and organizations defending UNRWA and basically trying to urge the International Court of Justice to issue its advisory opinion on the need to bring in immediately, without any delay, needed food and water into Gaza, and to defend UNRWA and to bring it basically back to its healthy situation, to render the needed services that it did over the past 75 odd years. As this effort is going, the Department of Justice in the United States had petitioned a federal court in New York against the same argument that the people at the International Court of Justice are trying to basically present. The Department of Justice had petitioned a federal court in New York in trying to rule that UNRWA should be stripped of its immunities and privileges, that it's not party to the 1946 Agreement of Privileges and Immunities, and that it should not be regarded as an integral part of the United Nations, which it is, and we will speak about that very soon. And the reason they're doing that is to allow the families of those kidnapped in October 7th to sue UNRWA. And the reason the Department of Justice is doing that is because part of the campaign to demonize and discredit UNRWA is not being done from a political perspective, but also the attempt had been from day one by the successive Israeli governments and also by the first Trump administration in 2018 and now, is to also starve UNRWA financially. If you starve UNRWA financially, then it will not be able to render needed services to millions of Palestinian refugees. So that is, if you like, the overall context. I would assume that the friends and colleagues joining in today are aware of basically UNRWA and the genesis of UNRWA. But just in case that there is some that do not know about UNRWA, maybe I will steal 1 to 2 minutes max to just basically give you a historical background to UNRWA. Omar, if you want me to stop on anything, or you want me to, just let me know.
No, please give the.
Yeah. I mean, for those who don't know, UNRWA stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. It was basically created in 1948 through UN Resolution 302. In May 1950, they started operations, and their mandate was restricted to basically delivering and giving basic humanitarian services, education and health and relief and social services to the Palestinian refugees that were affected after the Nakba of 1948. And their mandate was limited geographically to East Jerusalem and the West Bank. and Gaza, in historical Palestine, and outside of Palestine to Jordan, to the Palestinian refugees that were forced to go to Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And there's many historical reasons as to why the mandate was not expanded to include other countries, Arab countries, or else. Now, from 1950 till today, UNRWA was tasked to deliver basic humanitarian services. As I said, if you want me to jump just to 2025 and to give you a glimpse at the scope of the UNRWA services, UNRWA basically have 6 million Palestinian refugees registered with it. And those people are either the refugees that were kicked out in 1948 and their descendants, as the international law stipulates. Today, UNRWA operates in these 5 fields of operations. Its operations are massive, semi-state-like. They render the most important aspect of its services is its education through 700 schools, catering to 500,000 students. It boasts a large workforce of 30,000, 22,000 of them are teachers, renders effective health services through numerous clinics in 59 camps, and also the services to the Palestinian refugees who reside outside of the refugee camps, in addition to food services and aid of various sorts, loans to youth, empowering the youth. And UNRWA is sadly famous, unfortunately famous, for its effective emergency services. The various tribulations that the Palestinian refugees had faced from the 70s onward during the civil war in Jordan, the civil war in Lebanon, the first intifada, second intifada, third intifada, the 4 wars on Gaza, the destruction of Nahr al-Barid camp in 2006 in Lebanon, the destruction of refugee camps in Syria from 2011. UNRWA's cadre are extremely trained in rendering humanitarian emergency services, and I was rather proud and continue to be proud that I was a part of the core team that coordinated such emergency services. But it goes to show that after 75 years, the Palestinian refugees and the Palestinians are still facing detrimental and existential, basically, plight. Jumping quickly to the relationship between UNRWA and the Israeli government after 1967, when the rest of historical Palestine was occupied. And I will basically jump straight to the current situation of UNRWA and the Palestinian refugees. In 1967, in June 1967, when the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem were occupied, UNRWA, which was delivering services from 1948 till 1967, basically entered, or the Israelis sought the services of UNRWA. And in a few days after the June 6, 1967 war, UNRWA and the Israeli government entered into an agreement that is called Kumi-Macklemore Agreement. And this is relevant to the discussions at the International Court of Justice today. The Kumi-Macklemore Agreement of 1967, basically Israel acquiesced that UNRWA, as a specialized agency of the United Nations, is covered under the 1946 Privileges and Immunities Agreement. And as such, Israel would allow UNRWA to continue working on the occupied territories, and UNRWA would, and the Israelis would respect that. The reason the Israelis allowed UNRWA through this agreement to function is not because they like UNRWA or the United Nations, but being a smart occupation, they figured, listen, international law stipulates that an occupying power must render and ensure the delivery of basic services to the people it occupies. And here it happens that here is a UN agency called UNRWA that is doing these services to the Palestinian refugees already. So why don't we make this a profitable occupation? We occupy people, we suck the resources out of them, we use them for our own, for the construction of our own state, and we don't have to give them services. UNRWA will, and the international community basically will pump in money to UNRWA to deliver such services. So that was at the beginning very profitable and very convenient to the Israelis. Later on, it dawned on the Israelis that the presence of UNRWA basically rests on UN resolution that's still reminding the state of Israel that there's a problem called refugee problem, and that these refugees are demanding the right of return, and that there's UN resolutions, UN resolution 194 and subsequent resolutions that call for the return. And the president of UNRWA and it delivering services and it being given the mandate to protect Palestinian refugees had reminded the Israelis that they are an occupying power and that there's an unsolved issue called the Palestinian refugees. And from that moment onward, some sort of a love-hate relationship existed between the Israelis and UNRWA. And jumping straight, I'm going to basically burn several decades, and going to the year 2000, it dawned on the Israelis that they can start to do away with UNRWA, step in and deliver services directly to the people that occupied in the occupied territories, and start looking for ways to resettle the Palestinian refugees that happen to be sitting in refugee camps in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. So the campaign to delegitimize UNRWA, to basically discredit it and to paint it as a devil, started in 2000 by attacking UNRWA staff. UNRWA staff are Palestinians. Their heart is not with the United Nations. They're using UNRWA as a vehicle to push their aspirations as Palestinian refugees, because 99% of the staff of UNRWA are Palestinian refugees themselves, me included when I was working with UNRWA, and that UNRWA's textbooks basically foster violence and hatred, etc., etc. And so UNRWA have to go away. And they had invested tremendous amount of time, tremendous amount of money. Journalists, research centers, basically were devoted to convince the international community that UNRWA is the devil incarnate. You have to remember that UNRWA, as a UN specialized agency, does not have a budget given to it from the United Nations, and it depends on voluntary contributions. So those countries that give UNRWA money to support its services in the hope that this would lead to a two-state solution and a solution to the issue of Palestinian refugees and to the perpetual conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, they gave money voluntarily, and they gave handsome amount of money over the years. So the Israelis figured if we demonize UNRWA, we will weaken the financial support to it by nation states, particularly the United States. And historically, the United States was the #1 donor to UNRWA, and we will allude to this also later on. So the campaign to demonize UNRWA started in 2018. I will jump to 2018. I'm trying to basically squeeze everything in 20-25 minutes so that we'll have a good discussion afterwards. Jump to 2018 during Trump's first administration. I think I saw a note. If I'm not being clear on something, I'm more than happy to be stopped and maybe clarify issues or something.
ما بعرف مين هذا، بلاش يكون حدا من
Yeah. Okay. So I'll continue. I'm going to jump to 2018 during Trump's first administration. He had decided, after much influence and work by the Israeli political machine, that UNRWA, yes, is basically an agency that prolongs the refugee issue, and that UNRWA should go. So the Trump administration in 2018 suspended American financial aid to UNRWA, and subsequently it was decided that they would move the American embassy to Jerusalem. That was basically a linchpin, the start of basically moving the attack against UNRWA forward. Now, I'm again jump to 2000, October 7, 2023. The goal, aside from what happened in the first few days in October 7th, the goal of the Israeli genocide war on Gaza was not only to finish off the resistance in Gaza. Most people basically did not catch the point that the second aim, the second strategic aim of the state of Israel after October 7, 2023 was basically to resurrect the attacks on UNRWA. And they always felt that attacking UNRWA and demonizing it and discrediting it and financially basically stripping away from it its finances would lead to an end to the Palestine refugee problem, the key problem that basically stands in their path to claim all of historical Palestine, and that attacking UNRWA through the genocide war would achieve two main strategic goals. One is to finish the resistance, but the second goal was to finish UNRWA altogether as a prelude and entry to finishing off the refugee problem. Now, so here they basically racked up and increased tremendously their attacks on UNRWA. They basically forced UNRWA to not operate in north of Gaza during the first months of the genocide war, and that basically led to disastrous effects. Many might not know that UNRWA have the heaviest footprint in Gaza. 13,000 staff members of UNRWA work in Gaza. Almost 260,000 students are in Gaza. So we have a huge presence in many aspects, and UNRWA was very active in the subsequent wars on Gaza, the 4 subsequent wars in Gaza from 2008, 2014, 2017. So UNRWA was involved in the fiber of the Palestinian society and was involved in the rebuilding processes after all these wars. So UNRWA basically was active and had a heavy footprint in Gaza. So the demonizing process started, and UNRWA having so many schools, so many health centers, so many warehouses, the Palestinians in Gaza who were escaping the bombardment from the Israeli side sought refuge in these schools that were turned into basically centers, to protect them. UNRWA flies the United Nations flag on these buildings, and every day UN officials basically give the Israeli side the GPS coordinates of these buildings so that they will not be targeted. Yet during the war of genocide, almost 300 of these installations were targeted. Thousands upon thousands of refugees and non-refugees who sought refuge in these shelters were killed. And to date, 290 staff members from Gaza were killed. This is the highest number of UN personnel that were killed since the establishment of the United Nations in 1945. So the physical attack on UNRWA staff and its installations was coupled with a huge, systematic, very well financed, very well structured attack against UNRWA. And they basically repeated the same attacks that against UNRWA, and that some of the staff were involved in October 7th. Now, the United Nations formed an internal investigation committee, but they also formed an external investigation committee headed by the former French foreign minister. And they spent months on end, these two committees, to trying to prove or find proof that the Israeli claims are correct. And they came out with the fact that all these claims basically were false. And that also prompted some of the states that had suspended support to UNRWA. After these accusations, they brought back their finances to UNRWA. They're no dummies, and they will not bring their money unless there is a credible proof that UNRWA staff were not involved in any of these basically attacks. Yet the campaign against UNRWA persevered, and it continued. And I'm going to jump to the few months ago, actually 1 year ago, the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli parliament, passed unanimously two resolutions in parliament, and now they entered into law and to execution. The first basically resolution was to kick UNRWA out of Jerusalem, out of East Jerusalem. And the second one is that any Israeli official will be forbidden to deal with UNRWA in the West Bank and Gaza. Now, the first resolution, when it went into effect, it was immediately implemented. UNRWA's main historical headquarters in East Jerusalem was closed, and UNRWA was kicked out from it. And I mentioned earlier that UNRWA operates and works in 59 refugee camps in 5 areas of operation. 19 of these refugee camps are in the West Bank, and one of them are in East Jerusalem, Shafat refugee camps. So now the push is on to kick UNRWA out of Shafat refugee camp, to finish off the concept and the name of a refugee camp inside Jerusalem. The goal is twofold. One, for the Israelis, this is our unified capital. We cannot accept the East and West Jerusalem. This will be our unified eternal capital. The second thing is we cannot stomach and we will not accept the presence of a UN agency that reminds us that Jerusalem is not unified. There is 100,000 Palestinian refugees who reside in Jerusalem, including those refugees who live in Shafat refugee camp within the boundaries of Jerusalem. So the idea is the second point of this resolution is to basically finish with UNRWA and finish with anything called Palestine refugee issue in Jerusalem. The second resolution that was passed unanimously and is being implemented is basically to weaken UNRWA to the basically last breath, and they are successful in basically shocking off UNRWA and its operations in Gaza. So UNRWA now cannot operate fully in Gaza, barely, and with no aid coming, with no support coming to UNRWA, basically it could hardly do anything in Gaza. And the more important, or the equally important thing, is that also Gaza, as UNRWA is now being pushed out of the West Bank. There is a campaign for the past 3 months to empty out the refugee camps in the northern parts of the West Bank, in preparation to move to the to the camps in the central West Bank and then to the southern West Bank. There is 18 refugee camps. The idea is to depopulate them, and they had been successful in that effort. To date, there's 50,000 Palestinian refugees from 4 refugee camps in the northern parts of the West Bank that have been evacuated. And this is part of the Israeli declared plan of annexing the West Bank totally and legally, if you like, from an Israeli legal perspective, so that this would basically bring in the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal, in that sense, we're seeing it manifested in Gaza, supported by the American administration and other countries, sadly, is to push 2.5 million Gazans, or as many of them, out and to forcibly kick them out of Gaza, but at the same time ensure that also as many Palestinian refugees and non-refugees from the West Bank are also kicked out of the West Bank. So with all this happening, the campaign against UNRWA continues. UNRWA is being starved financially. It could barely stand on its own 2 feet. The international staff of UNRWA, 134 of them, many of them, basically, not all of them that operate and work in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, were kicked out, and their visas were not renewed. So basically, UNRWA is teetering on collapse, and thus the importance of the deliberations that started yesterday in the International Court of Justice. So we're looking at forced starvation. We're looking at forced expulsion. We're looking at eager attempts to resettle the Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and to kick the rest, the refugees from the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem out. And we're looking at attempts to cancel and weaken the Palestinian refugees' right of return in that sense. And all of this is happening under the rubric and the umbrella of an ongoing genocide. This is a very quick and speedy, basically, intervention. I look forward for discussion. Thank you.
I think most of us are speechless, Sami. It's very depressing, the situation. You know, it's UNRWA is a semi-state in Palestine, and with the protection of the international community, theoretically, we have hoped that there would be better efforts to stop this nonsense and this continuing genocide, and also the massacring of the Palestinian refugee cause. You don't leave much places for hope, but for us to be active, we need to be believing in something hopeful, in something that we can do. Can you tell us, like, who is leading successful campaigns at the moment, and how people can be engaged into like doing the positive towards canceling the decisions, stopping the actions, and empowering not only UNRWA, but it is facilitating the right of return for Palestinian refugees and the implementation of international law.
Well, the Gid Ansar, the current foreign minister of Israel, was very clear in response to the ICJ deliberations by him saying that irrespective of the advisory rule of the ICJ, they will not deal with UNRWA, and their campaign to basically finish off UNRWA and finish off the right of return of Palestinian refugees would continue unabated. And I think they are very effective in that sense. The court proceedings in New York is very telling, and I'm hopeful perhaps that the federal judge in New York would basically turn down the attempt of the Justice Department effort to delegitimize UNRWA. But I'm also not very hopeful on the global level. It's very clear now that the United Nations administration, whether this one or maybe the subsequent ones, will bring back their support, financial support to UNRWA. And when we talk about financial support to UNRWA, we're not talking about huge sums. You're talking about 6 million refugees, depending on UNRWA services, people going through one emergency after the other. And the overall budget of UNRWA is 1.44 billion people. And at the best of estimates, best of years, UNRWA received only 50% of that. And even that before UNRWA was attacked. Now UNRWA receives very meager amounts. And with the disappearance of American support, financial support to UNRWA, UNRWA is really struggling financially. And that also have a knock-off effect on its ability to deliver even the basic minimum of services to the Palestinian refugees, those who are coming out of the civil war in Syria, those going through difficult times in Lebanon, those in Jordan. The largest number of Palestinian refugees are in Jordan, and they are categorized as the poorest of the poor. And of course, the difficult situation the Palestinian refugees go through in the occupied territory. So UNRWA stand alone politically. There is verbal support, non-stop verbal support from the Secretary General of the United Nations down, from various Arab states and from others in that sense. But that verbal support is not translated to solid political support that also is translated into financial support. The way to maintain UNRWA is to support it financially, and that is not basically happening. $1.4 billion is, again, small amount of money, basically change when compared to other humanitarian crises in the world, and yet UNRWA is struggling to get the money. A side note: the Arab League years ago had voted that the Arab nations, the Arab states, should basically ensure that they cover 8% of UNRWA's budget, and sadly, they only cover at best 2%. So that goes to show you that verbal support doesn't mean anything if it's not backed up by strong political support and also by financial support. It's nice and it's rewarding, and we accept it with gratitude that 39 countries are presenting their cases before the International Court of Justice in support of UNRWA, and that the Treaty of Privileges and Immunities is inclusive and includes UNRWA. That is appreciated. The words of encouragement is appreciated. But these same countries that are showing this tremendous amount of support are not basically rising up to the challenge and supporting UNRWA financially. And more importantly, they are weak, and their voice is voiceless, if you like, when it comes to collectively saying that as of tomorrow, we will break the siege around Gaza and will bring needed food and water to 2.5 million people that are dying from starvation. So one final point that comes to mind is that despite the gloom and doom, if you like, aspect of what I'm trying to say, there is always a silver lining. Silver lining is what we see in many countries and many capitals of the world, United States and Europe included, and particularly. The youth taking to the streets, unions, activists, teachers, professors, people, regular people who are going about their life, yet finding the time to show support to the Palestinians standing against genocide. And also now even the demonstrations and marching in support of UNRWA had meant that UNRWA is not alone. And also a very heartwarming development is that the individual donations to UNRWA have spiked thousands percent, if you like, by people who are recognizing that their $5 might not seem a big amount, but yet it's a symbolic yet also practical way to show solidarity with UNRWA. I failed to see that the United Nations would come to UNRWA's aid. I think the campaign against UNRWA by the Israeli administration and the American administration would continue, and that they will continue to mark successes to their side. And that, again, I welcome the ICJ, I welcome the support, but I don't see this support basically transferring into reality in supporting the Palestinian refugees in Gaza first, in supporting UNRWA second, and in supporting the Palestinian right of return third.
There has been a number of comments and questions sent to me or are in the chat, so I'll go through them, and we'll have to then we will offer questions or comments for people to do it orally. Historically, when there's a home demolition, at least in East Jerusalem, or there's a demonstration, we find international diplomats present. Most of us haven't noticed, maybe we're mistaken, we haven't seen or the presence of international diplomats defending UNRWA or even being present openly, at least, at UNRWA. Is there a reason, or are we mistaken? They have been taking a stand and we haven't noticed them.
Well, I mean, some of them do it shyly. Some of them basically are resigned to the facts on the ground. And some of them, frankly, are terribly afraid that they will be branded as haters of this side and supporters of that side. And sometimes fear trumps basically taking a position. But take, for example, the day before yesterday, or actually yesterday, when a representative of 14 different basically countries converged on Shafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem to show solidarity with the people of the camp. Why? Because in 2 weeks' time, the Israeli municipality and the Israeli Ministry of Interior had notified UNRWA that in 2 weeks' time, UNRWA schools must basically cease. They had already closed UNRWA's headquarters center in Jerusalem. They had already closed a huge and big health center inside the old city itself. So it's a matter of consequence that they are also moving now on Shafat refugee camp, and the same will be done in the refugee camps in the West Bank as they did in Gaza. So yes, those courageous diplomats showed up yesterday in Shafat, but their actions are far in between, and there is no continuity. And this presence on the ground in showing basically solidarity with the refugees and with UNRWA, again, does not travel to the capitals themselves. And again, we hear the same strong, adamant positions in support of UNRWA and the two-state solution, etc., etc. But when it comes to actual steps to finish the genocide, bring in food and water into Gaza, support UNRWA physically and support UNRWA financially, we see that they fall basically short. Why? They have certain, if you like, weapons in their hand, between brackets, that they could use to force all the participants to basically look at this issue from a different perspective. This zero-sum game cannot continue. The position of the current Israeli government that win all or lose all will not fly. Perpetual conflict does not work. And listening to reason is not happening in the Israeli political system these days. And that is detrimental to the future of everybody involved.
Thank you. There's a question or a clarification on how did your time come to an end with UNRWA? Was it because of retirement age or because of the crisis?
No, I think you could see from my face that it's old age. I mean, I reached the retirement age, and And actually I left sadly in a sense that I finished work with UNRWA upon retirement in May 2022. And I wish to God that I was able to continue to work with UNRWA and to give any form of assistance that I could. But no, it was just basically retirement.
You've mentioned that some countries have reinstated their funding to UNRWA. Did they go back to their previous amounts, or?
Yeah, I mean, yes, after 16 countries immediately followed the decision of Trump in his second administration to suspend, actually Biden had suspended UNRWA, financial support to UNRWA during his last year in office. And basically the Trump administration reinforced that position. But when Biden did that, 16 countries followed suit without even, I mean, these are countries that have long historical diplomatic understanding of the world and political understanding of the world, and yet they did not even bother to look at the report of the former French foreign minister that exonerated UNRWA in that sense. And they followed blindly the decision of the Biden administration at that time, and they suspended support to UNRWA financially. When they looked into the report, they basically backtracked and they reinstated the support to the UNRWA financially. But when we talk about support to UNRWA financially, the amount given to UNRWA is always far less than what they demand. So when UNRWA, for instance, in 2024 asked for $1.4 billion, it received 50% of that. And UNRWA have a separate budget for emergencies to rebuild what was destroyed in Syria, to rebuild what was destroyed in Lebanon, and definitely to rebuild what was destroyed in Gaza. And this particular budget is separate from the regular budget, and this even receives less than 50% every year, and now even less than that. So UNRWA been chronically living in a chronic deficit in that sense. So when we talk about the resumption of aid, we meaning that they resumed their minimum support to the UNRWA financially, which did not help it basically on the long run, but it enabled to deliver the basic minimum of services. But yet, to answer the question, yes, they reinstated it. Some countries basically conditioned it that we would like to give the money to these areas of operation and not to this part of your work and not to that. And some of them actually, they reduced the amount somewhat. And surprisingly, one of the strongest advocates of UNRWA, which is Sweden, have decided to suspend UNRWA's support altogether, while countries like Norway and Denmark and others increased their support to the agency. I must also be straightforward and honest in saying that there's a huge dismay among the Palestinian refugees and also by people like myself who work with UNRWA, that the support from the Gulf states had been always dismal. Yes, they did give UNRWA tidy sums during emergency situations like the subsequent wars on Gaza. But when it comes to the support to UNRWA's regular budget was always way below the desired amounts. And again, we're talking about amounts that will not leave any dent in their national budgets. But that also is a point to ponder why this strong political rhetoric in support of the Palestinian refugees and Palestine in general and UNRWA is not translated into financial support.
A question: does lobbying our local representatives make any progress?
Yes. Many. I was able to basically follow many of the public debates that happened at city levels and in various universities in the United States in particular, on the issue of genocide, on the issue of Palestinian refugees, and also UNRWA was figured into these discussions. And it just amazed me every time. The interventions, they give you 1 minute to go to the podium and give state your position in these discussions before the motion is voted upon by the members of the municipality or something like that. And it amazed me the number of people that took to the podium in trying to urge their local representatives to basically speak truth to power and stand for justice. And the number of motions that was passed sometimes unanimously or many times unanimously, is a testament that yes, local, talking to your local representative is important as much as writing even an op-ed in the newspaper, a letter to the editor, writing to the congressperson, to the congress people, to the senators, going down the street for a demonstration. Any small between brackets, because there's nothing small about it, but any action on the ground that does have an effect, believe it or not. The key point of it is that it basically tells the Palestinians in Gaza and in the occupied territories, one, that you're not alone, that people understand the quest for freedom and justice, and that tyranny basically cannot go unchallenged. So any effort basically helps.
How can we explain that many Arab governments and regional governments have not spoken up, since probably that a new refugee crisis will not be good for the whole region?
Sorry, Omar, I didn't understand it.
How can we explain that regional countries, and especially Arab countries, have not been very much involved or active in defending UNRWA, given that a refugee crisis will erupt in the whole region?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I will be very blunt and direct. There's no reason to sugarcoat these things. The reason people are speaking, Arab states are speaking against the expulsion of Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza into their own borders. The fear is that is not driven by worry about the fate of these people, but it's a worry, it's a security worry that those that we will accept into our borders will be claiming again the right to return, and this will basically upset the security balance, if you like, in our own countries. So they are adamant in stopping the expulsion because of that reason, and that also works for us, because we also do not want to leave, and we have learned from the Nakba of 1948, and the Gazans and West Bankers and East Jerusalem residents, Palestinians, do not want to leave basically their ancestral homes. Again, their support to UNRWA, to the support to the issue of Palestine, is genuine, because the masses, the Arab masses, and everyone else basically understand that this is a path that these people are striving toward, basically freedom and justice. But the calculations of the various nation states basically stand in the way of adopting a unified position by the Arab states and the Arab League, and their position rarely goes up beyond the square of condemnation, expressing anger, and it really basically travels into actionable points, into working even harder than they're doing now on creating a path towards basically a political solution that meets the needs of the Palestinians and the Palestinian refugees.
And my follow-up question is, what's the response of the Palestinian Authority to UNRWA, and the closure?
Well, I mean, if you look at the interventions that were made yesterday by the Palestinian delegation, the interventions were really, really strong. There is no shortage of support, not necessarily only from the Palestinian Authority, but all the Palestinians, the Palestinian refugees, the popular committees that represent the Palestinian refugees and refugee camps, the unions, the think tanks that basically study and follow the Palestinian refugee issue, the political factions, and including the Palestinian Authority, they basically recognize the importance of UNRWA, not only politically, but also UNRWA is badly needed because the Palestinian Authority is hampered, and they're even in a worse financial situation than UNRWA, and they could hardly do any of this UNRWA services. So the vacuum that would be created by the forced absence of UNRWA would have a knockoff effect and a domino effect on the Palestinian Authority. So the position, the collective position of the Palestinians, if you like, their political factions, their civil society institutions, and everybody else had been steadfast in supporting UNRWA, and they've been trying hard to complement some of UNRWA's services. So when UNRWA was kicked out from the 4 refugee camps in the northern parts of the West Bank, and dozens of the homes inside these refugee camps were demolished, and almost 50,000 people were pushed into internal expulsion into other parts of the West Bank. Palestinian community, Palestinian business people, the Palestinian Authority, factions, community, civil society institutions all stepped in trying to cover some of UNRWA services. Mind you, in Gaza, for the past almost 2 years, there's no school, there's no schooling for the children. These children are traumatized. It will take years to basically create conditions for them mentally to come back to some sort of normalcy in their lives. And the same thing is happening now in the northern parts of the West Bank. There's no schooling for the past 60 days. There's no health centers open. Elderly with the chronic diseases are not getting treatment. Risk pregnancies are not being dealt with, etc., etc. So the situation is worsening by the day, and the Palestinian representative bodies and everybody else can ill afford to basically step in and replace UNRWA's services because they are in the same basically boat.
And because of the time, we're running out of time. There's one last question. Is what weapons or tools can the people use to break the siege? The international system, UN with ICJ, ICC is broken because of the US and Israel's disregard of for the law. What can we use?
You mean for the people themselves in Gaza, or people outside? What can they do beyond?
No, people outside. We are talking about.
I mean, basically, one, to continue doing what we are doing and what they are doing. Let us not underestimate at all the taking to the streets and the basically the changes among the youth and others in the way they look at the conflict. And people listen, decision makers listen. You might not find that they're listening quickly enough, but that is basically having an effect. So speaking out and continue to stand basically for the principal positions that people have been articulating for the past basically 2 years is crucial. It's important, should not be underestimated, should not basically be looked at. We should not create a sense of hopelessness in that sense. So in the absence of any concrete steps that you and I and the people going about their daily lives, in the absence of more things to do, we need to do more of this particular thing. Challenging the political decisions of their countries is crucial. And yes, this is having an effect, slow, but it's having an effect. Beyond that, basically, is to continue doing what we're doing. And I basically believe that this is the best course of action. And also standing up to the narrative that is being pushed by the Israeli government on the people of the world, and to question what is being thrown at them on the regular media that they listen to.
Francis, because you've had your hand up, so we will make the since the beginning, so we will give you the opportunity to ask a question or to make a very short comment before we conclude.
We cannot hear.
Mute, Francis. Yeah.
My question is, when the IDF empties a refugee camp, where do the people go?
Yes, thank you. I just also forgot to mention by way of action points, and I saw it in the conversation, that the PDS, the boycott and divestment and sanction movement, is crucially important. The successes that they are marking basically all over the world, including in Europe and the United States, is paramount as important. And the more support one can give to the PDS and to unions working to against the shipping of arms, etc., are very important by way of actions. Yes, if you take the examples of the 4 refugee camps in the northern parts of the West Bank, when the Israeli soldiers went into these 4 refugee camps, they basically demolished a good number of houses. They closed UNRWA clinic, UNRWA schools, and the 40 to 50,000 odd refugees that were forced out were internally displaced. Some of them went into whatever relatives they have outside. Some of them, basically, the Red Crescent and the Red Cross tried to help them by opening a sports hall or anything available, basically, by way of temporary shelters. And the Palestinians throughout their history are known for reacting quickly to these situations. So people's homes in cities, adjacent cities and towns and villages, basically were opened to people. Empty apartments were given. People basically from all over the West Bank and from even Palestinians in the 1948 areas tried to bring in trucks with food and blankets and what have you. So, but these efforts versus the growing needs, basically there's a lapse and there's a gap between them. And those people, every other day there's an attempt to go back, and they are pushed back. And actually a good number of refugees were killed in trying to basically come back to the refugee camps, because now it's a off limit to people. But the situation continues as is. The worry is that this will soon transfer to the central and the southern parts of the West Bank, including the refugee camps there. Smotrich, who is the right of center, actually the rightest of the right of center Minister of Finance in the current Israeli government, his plan is very clear. It's called the annexation plan. He basically intends to annex almost all of the West Bank and to legitimize all of the settlements, double the number of settlers and settlements, and basically box in the Palestinian communities in the West Bank into 8 different ghettos as part of the overall genocide war ongoing all over Palestine. But thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Sami. I have to admit that Sami is maybe the most leading active person on working with UNRWA. You're definitely an authority on the topic, and we can tell that it is all of your heart and mind are in the fight. And I hope we will be able to find ways to continue to be part of the bigger Palestinian struggle for liberation and ending every unjust decision that the Israeli government is making. Thank you very much, Sami, and looking forward to having you all with us next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.